it gets real.
A lot of excitement playing an SEC opponent on the road.
A road date with an old friend to kick off a gauntlet.
Probably give him a little text this week.
This week on The Beat, why Kirby Smart says it was mission accomplished against Tennessee Tech, and what our boots on the ground captured that wasn't great on Saturday. On The Beat starts right now.
Giving you the insider takes and the big picture view on the Dogs. This is On the Beat, presented by Ingles with DawgNation insider Mike Griffith and Cody Chaffins.
Good Monday evening to you. Cody Chaffins and Mike Griffith here, kind of grooving on this Monday night with the intro. I like that. Mike, you ready for a road trip this week?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun one as Georgia gets ready to take on Kentucky. We'll talk about that game, talk about Tennessee Tech. We'll also do our boots on the ground segment again and Mike's 30,000-foot view. A lot to get to here on the Beat, presented by Ingles. But let's start with today. Kirby Smart meets with the media on Mondays. As always, our Mike Griffith in the room asking questions. And a lot of the questions today, Mike, are about facing Brock Vandagriff, our old friend, who is now 1-1 as the starting quarterback at Kentucky.
Well, I don't think Kirby has many questions about Brock Vandagriff. If you remember, the Brock Vandagriff Carson Beck quarterback competition was very real. They had the same supporting cast. It looks different for Brock Vandagriff at Kentucky. The offensive line isn't as good. The weapons aren't as good. And consequently, his play has not reflected him to be as good as he was at Georgia when he very nearly won the starting quarterback job. You can go all the way back to that spring game and look at Kirby's comments. And, you know, it was Carson up first, and Carson did nothing to lose the job. He won games. He advanced. I think Carson has more arm talent than Brock. But I think Brock has some qualities that gave him a shot at that job. And it's going to be a more competitive game, I think, than people realize. I know how Georgia and Kentucky are. This is always a really physical game. And you know Brock's going to leave it on the field. I mean, this is a true dual-threat quarterback. This is a guy that's going to lower his shoulder. He's not going to run out of bounds. And he's going to try to make some plays. And meanwhile, Georgia, obviously, with Carson Beck, they're going to try to make some plays too against Jamon Dumas-Johnson, another former Bulldog that plays middle linebacker for Kentucky. So the Wildcats are going to come with their claws sharpened. It's under the lights in the SEC. And you never know what can happen under the lights in the SEC, Cody.
Yeah, and it's going to be a whole different game. You cannot anticipate. They got blown out by South Carolina last week. It's going to be anything like that. Really a tale of 2 weeks for Brock Vandagriff. 3 touchdowns. Did throw 1 interception in his first week. That was 2.5 quarters against Southern Miss, but totally only completed 3 passes against South Carolina last week, was sacked 4 times. And, you know, as part of me started to think, Mike, did he make the right choice? He didn't have a choice, really. He had to leave Georgia at this point because he hadn't played football consistently since 2020 when he was at Prince Avenue Christian. Kirby Smart loves to talk about, and he did a lot in this press conference today, staying at Georgia, being developed. You can't beat, what goes on in our practices. But for a quarterback like that, I think his hands were tied. He had graduated from Georgia, done everything he wanted to do there. He had to go somewhere, and Kentucky was his landing spot.
Yeah, I mean, Brock gave it a chance. He went 3 years and had an opportunity to compete for the starting job, lost, and stayed through the season. And like you said, he graduated. He transferred in early December. He didn't wait for the Carson Beck negotiations to get finished. I mean, he had decided then and there that he was going to move on. Carson had a very good season and was clearly going to be the quarterback of the future. And, Kirby Smart says no hard feelings. And, the thing about Brock Vandagriff, he really had the room. I mean, this guy has a lot of charisma and a lot of leadership traits. A lot of teammates were bought into him. But as it turned out, Carson Beck's arm talent was too much for Brock to overcome, and the direction that Georgia was going to go under Mike Bobo. So I don't think it's a bad situation for Brock. I just think it's going to be more difficult because he doesn't have the offensive line. He doesn't have the offensive firepower around him, and he's quite limited to what he can do. So it is intriguing to see a former Bulldog quarterback face Georgia. And Brock Vandagriff, he'll bring his best game. I just don't think he's got the weapons or the sporting cast. Yes, I do think Kentucky can keep this close early, but ultimately Georgia's a far better team.
Yeah, one thing about Brock Vandagriff, I watched him in high school at Prince Avenue Christian, and he was such a leader, such a gamer, commanded his huddle. He's son of a coach, obviously, so you expect some of that. But just the way he goes about things, he is a leader, and he will have his Wildcats ready to face off against Georgia. And you talk about the talent imbalance that we see between these two teams. Maybe the great equalizer, to quote Elvis Presley, that old Kentucky rain. We're expecting some rain up there, some remnants from Francine, which is now a hurricane down in the Gulf. You know, I used to be a weatherman, Mike. So it was kind of a hurricane here. We're expecting the remnants, tropical remnants up, dropping a bunch of rain. So maybe that's an equalizer on Saturday in the Bluegrass.
I believe the weatherman part because you sure weren't a singer, Cody. That does look like inclement weather, and that can be a bit of an equalizer, especially on a field like Kentucky has. And you wonder about the Georgia offense and, if Kirby turns Carson Beck loose or if Georgia can run the ball effectively. I thought it was really big this last week. Trevor Etienne back in the fold. I mean, he's averaging over 15 yards a carry. You might say, well, that's Tennessee Tech. Well, conversely, Tennessee Tech ran for 100 yards on Georgia, Cody, and you wonder if the Kentucky run game is as good as Tennessee Tech. I'm not saying it is or it isn't, but if there was one thing glaring about last Saturday's game against Tennessee Tech, it was the way they were able to run the ball effectively on the Bulldogs.
Yeah, Kirby Smart talking after that game, they said, was it, successful? He said, well, we lost the 2-minute drill at the end of the first half. Wasn't real happy about that. Wasn't real happy about the run game as well. But when you were in the press conference today talking about the Tennessee Tech game, you got Kirby to say mission accomplished, at least about one thing in that game on Saturday.
Yeah, they were able to get a lot of young players snaps, and really that's what these bye games are for. And we're going to have an enterprise story on that on DawgNation.com this week that I'm working on. When you see these teams schedule these types of opponents, what are they trying to get out of you? I mean, obviously you got to put another team on the field and, fill out your stadium to make some money. But for the coaches, it's an opportunity to try some different things, rest key players, and get a lot of young players key experiences, or in this case, get Trevor Etienne's feet wet as he was suspended for the opening game.
Did you like what you saw out of Etienne in that game? He broke off the 45-yarder, didn't have a ton of chances, but kind of made the most of what he got.
Yeah, I thought he looked okay, for an opening game. Maybe not as dynamic as I would have hoped, but at the same time, I don't know that there was a lot of dynamic things happening around him. I mean, you look at the stats and you look at the final score, you might say, what are you talking about? But if you watch that game, the Georgia offense is still a little bit off. Something's not quite there yet. I don't think we've seen Carson Beck have his best game yet. It may have something to do with the opponent and the fact that they were playing a largely a makeshift offensive line. They got a lot of guys, a lot of reps. So I'm not going to put it all on Carson. I'm not going to put it all on Etienne. I just don't think we've seen Georgia's best offensive efforts yet. And I think that's probably by design as far as the Tennessee Tech game.
Yeah, I think, Kentucky found out a lot about their team by losing to South Carolina this week. I think Georgia, by getting in the SEC, there's still a lot of question marks, a lot of things we don't know about this Georgia team even 2 games in.
Yeah, I told you before the show, I don't want to say that Kirby was lying, but I've learned to listen closely to Kirby's words. And when I asked him about the interior defensive tackles, he said he was excited about them. Now, does excited necessarily mean happy or pleased or think they're great? No, I don't think so. I bet he's excited. I bet he's excited every time he saw Tennessee Tech gouge his defensive line. That's not supposed to happen. And Kirby called this out a year and a half ago, that there was no train wreckers or havoc makers. And I thought he was kind of putting Brinson and Stackhouse on notice. Now, Brinson didn't play, Stackhouse did. But at this point, I think you got what you got with those two, and they're pretty darn good. Better than most. I mean, they're NFL players, probably 3rd-round picks. But you wonder how quickly the young guys like Kristen Miller, Jamal Jarrett can come along. I thought Jamal Jarrett, showed his wares pretty good. There is some young depth there. This is a unit that will get better as the year progresses. But I do think, Cody, that this still remains Georgia's Achilles heel is that interior defensive line.
Yeah, we did see that sack from Kristen Miller on Saturday. Would like to see, he just feels like one of those players who is ready to break out. He just, every time you're like, the talent is there, and there are certain plays, and maybe it's just the consistency that we got to see a player like that get in the backfield, most plays and start wreaking that havoc like you talked about.
Yeah, again, as you said, a lot of young players have emerged already. Kristen Miller, a guy that they're going to be counting on for more snaps with Warren Brinson, I think held out precautionary, and Michael Williams as well. And I kind of wonder about Michael's status for this week. I think Kirby kind of left the door open for him to play or not play. On the injury front, he did say that he thought Oscar Delp would be fine, and he may be fine. But I wonder about his efficiency. A big, strong, powerful, dynamic guy like that, playing with a taped ankle. I mean, he's good enough to play, but will he be dynamic? And that's the question anytime a guy goes down. I really think when you look at Georgia, And I'm not saying that Kirby's going to, take it easy on Kentucky. I don't think that's the case at all. But I think he'll be very calculated with who plays and to what extent, because then you've got a bye week. And if you give a guy a week off, you're really giving him 2 weeks off. So I would watch the status of Oscar Delp and Warren Brinson again to see if they start or play against Kentucky. Does Kirby think that he needs them? Because if you can give him this Saturday off, you're really giving him 2 weeks off because there's a bye week before the Alabama game.
Yeah, you got a team in Kentucky that gave up 4 sacks last week. So if there's a week for the defensive line to break out, maybe that's it. Michael Williams, we did see on the sideline. I watched him kind of walk across the field. He was in good spirits. He was into the game on the sideline, letting guys know what's going on. But I don't know if you need him. If you feel like you can get sacks with, the guys you got in there, maybe you're in good shape. And you got to believe that Mark Stoops in Kentucky will be planning to get the ball out quickly based on what happened last week and knowing what they face against Georgia, because that seems to be the case all the time. One of the other things we saw this week from that defensive line, Jordan Thomas, one of the young guys who did play this week, got a sack. The team went crazy. So that was something I saw on the sideline. We'll get to something else I saw as my boots were on the ground on the sideline for Tennessee Tech. We'll talk about that. We'll also get Mike's 30,000-foot view on what's going on around the country and the ups and downs we see with some teams. We'll talk about that all coming up after the break. This is On the Beat, presented by Ingalls.
So, you gonna play this week?
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 You gonna play this
You
week?
gonna play this week?
You gonna play this week?
You gonna play this week?
You gonna play this week?
This week?
And welcome to the Ingalls Game of the Week as the Warhorses square off against the rival.
He's going in.
He's going in. Go, baby!
Ingalls, we're with you every step of the way.
Welcome back to On the Beat. As we introduced our news segment last week called Boots on the Ground, I get to shoot all of these games from the sideline, and I get to see some things that maybe don't make the national broadcast, or if you're in the stadium, you don't get to see. So I like to share some of that in this segment we call Boots on the Ground. All right, so I had a trio of things for you last week. Tennessee Tech game, it wasn't a whole lot, like you said, Mike, not a whole lot going on. But one thing did catch my eye after the second touchdown of the day. This one went to Colby Young, kind of dragging across, and Carson Beck hit him, and it looked pitch and catch really easy. But after the touchdown, I watched Carson Beck. Usually he's the holder for the extra point, so he's usually just stays with the huddle. But he came over to talk to Colby Young, and I'll show you the video. You could see that Carson and Colby kind of had something to say, and so I was curious about what were you chatting about. So I got to talk to Carson Beck after the game. I said, what were you telling Colby right there about that? And hear what Carson had to say about that conversation.
I was trying to check the play, and then he ran the original play, which it ultimately ended up working, which is kind of funny. But no, he's a really talented guy. Obviously last week the touchdown, this week the touchdown again.
All right, so Colby Young ran the wrong route. He didn't get the check from Carson Beck. They still score a touchdown, so it tells me a few things. First off, uber talented, right? Can get himself open even when the play is he's not running the right route and score the touchdown. He's the red zone threat for Georgia, but it also makes me worry just a little bit. Like if we're missing calls, and you remember he's only in his first year with this Georgia offense. A lot of times guys like Dom Lumpet, who we saw last year, say that takes 1 year to kind of get acclimated to this Georgia offense. So he's still really young in it. Mike, what is your first reaction when you hear, hey, he's running the wrong route, and, Carson kind of called him out, but he still scores the touchdown?
Well, it tells me Carson's got to work on his leadership. He should never call another player out. He should have never said that. He should have never embarrassed Colby Young. That's a conversation for him and Colby Young and Mike Bobo. I think back to Jake Fromm, and there were plenty of times when players around Jake would make mistakes and Jake would fall on the sword. That's leadership. And I think Carson needs to recognize that. Now, the fact of the matter is, Carson Beck has a lot of pressure on him to be the number one quarterback, to be all these things that everybody says that he is, especially after he's putting out videos of playing golf and making commercials all summer. But calling out a teammate is never a good thing to do. Most quarterbacks will say, well, that's just us talking about the play, or, one of us might have made a mistake there. So that's a little surprising for me. And I think that's something that Carson should probably reflect on. There's probably been plenty of times when Carson's made mistakes, and I haven't heard his teammates call him out. So to me, that's a little bit of a red flag at this stage of Carson's career, Cody.
Yeah, that's a really interesting take, and somewhere that I didn't go with that because I just kind of asked him. I said, "What were you guys talking about?" And he was honest. But yeah, do you want that honesty? Is that something that needs to happen there? Does it tell you anything about Colby Young? If we get past maybe that he shouldn't have even said it, but is he anything beyond just a red zone weapon at this point? Does that make you worry? If game's on the line, is he going to be on the field?
Not really, because Kirby told us that he was getting limited practice reps because he's playing hurt right now. So, that being said, with him being a new receiver and him having limited reps, we know at least last week, they're putting him in packages and, trying not to overdo it as they try to get him healthy. So I don't think so. I mean, this is a very complicated offense and there are a lot of checks and I'm sure Carson's frustrated in the sense that, he's capable of doing anything and everything because he's such an intelligent guy. But it kind of reminds me a little bit of Peyton Manning. And I don't know how many people remember when Peyton Manning was at Tennessee, but boy, Peyton Manning could call any play in the playbook, but it only works if the other 10 guys can keep up with you. So there may be some frustration there from Carson. There may have been some other checks that other people missed. And this is something that Kirby talked about. Kirby said, that he wanted Carson to spend more time with these guys in the offseason. He wanted him to get acquainted with the new guys, not just the guys coming back. And, the head coach has been stressing this. And honestly, Cody, this is on Carson Beck. It's up to Carson Beck to have these guys ready. It's up to Carson Beck to make sure all these guys know all the checks. There's an unlimited amount of voluntary time in the summer to be working out. And again, this is where people are going to question NIL and where players are investing their time and efforts, especially, like I said, when players are advertising it on their social media channels that they're out doing things that aren't football related.
So we, the first couple of weeks of the season, we had heard all these great things about Carson and he's leading team meetings and he's doing all, we had heard all of these things were going the right way. Does this show you proof that maybe everybody was just saying that and there were some things that were missing?
Not necessarily. It just shows me that Carson is still learning to be a leader and learning how to handle this amount of pressure. And, listen, this is a guy that takes care of business in the classroom. This is the guy that's responsible off the field. This is a guy that's a good ambassador for Georgia. College is about learning, Cody. And to be fair, Carson had 3 years where he wasn't in that fishbowl and he wasn't in the spotlight and he wasn't being scrutinized to this level. And none of us face the pressure that Carson Beck does. I mean, I regularly might have one or two typos in a story, and you're not going to hear anybody call me out. Well, you might hear some people call me out at it in the comments section. I know who you people are. I make mistakes, but when Carson makes a mistake, he makes a mistake in front of millions of people. And this is a guy who held himself to very high standards. And the reality of the situation is that Carson Beck doesn't go undefeated and win the Heisman Trophy. Then there'll be some people disappointed because that was the amount of expectation and pressure coming in. Now, Carson puts that pressure on himself and holds himself to that high standard. All I'm saying is when you're a leader, you've got to take accountability and responsibility. And if Colby ran the wrong route, that's something Carson's got to say to himself. I didn't work enough with this guy. I didn't help him out enough. They had all summer to make sure they were on the same page on all these checks. So this is where Carson has to learn that if anything goes wrong on offense, ultimately he's responsible, just like Kirby Smart. If anything goes wrong with the football team, we all point to Kirby Smart, even if he wasn't directly supervising that activity or he wasn't directly in charge of that player. So I think this is an opportunity to learn for Carson. And again, it's hard to call a guy out after he throws 5 touchdown passes and has almost a perfectly efficient day. But these are growing pains, and these are things that Carson will learn on his way up. He is an NFL quarterback. He is a first-round pick, a top 10 pick. He doesn't look like the best quarterback in the nation yet. He probably looks like the 3rd or 4th. I'd say he will be going to New York as a finalist if Georgia makes the playoffs, but I'd be surprised if he won the Heisman Trophy.
I think you said it really well right there. What place are we in when we can kind of you scored a touchdown on the play, but we're getting in the weeds and we're nitpicking a little bit, but that's when you're playing this well, we've got to find some things, and that was something this week that we saw on our boots on the ground. So I'm sure we'll see a lot more coming up next week. But if we're going to go right down and get in the weeds, we also need to take a big picture view. So let's do Mike's 30,000-foot view. All right, Mike, so I'm sitting there on Saturday. I get home from the Georgia game, and I'm watching Alabama and South Florida, and these fans are pulling their hair. They're not getting mad over a touchdown play. They can't get a snap off in a lot of these games. You look at Alabama struggles. Of course, Auburn loses at home to Cal from the ACC, and out west, Kentucky, we talked about the up and down. Notre Dame gets upset. So there's so many ups and downs. So we'll start with Alabama first. What do you make of, South Florida seems to really have their number?
Yeah, South Florida came in fired up, and they were a bigger, better opponent than Western Kentucky, and some of the things that were working against Western Kentucky weren't working against South Florida. So, I think that was a good game for Alabama to have those struggles, to have to adjust, to have to deal with some adversity. I think now Kalen DeBoer has some film to work with, and we're going to find out just how good of a coach that he is. Because the Tide's going to have a challenge coming up against Wisconsin. And I don't think Wisconsin's talented enough to beat them, but, away from Tuscaloosa, I do think it'll present some challenges. I do think it's going to enable Kalen DeBoer to make some key adjustments and kind of like learn his strengths and weaknesses, much like Georgia did against Clemson in week 1. So I still think Alabama's dangerous. I still think they're explosive on offense. I think their defense is more than adequate. It's going to be a tough trip for Georgia up there. But the big takeaway for me was up north in Ann Arbor, where we saw Texas absolutely throttle Michigan. And I can tell you, the AJC, we do this SEC Power Poll. It comes out on Thursdays in the paper. And I've already got a look at the votes. And I can tell you, Georgia's not a unanimous number 1 anymore. And there might be more than 1 or 2 voting Texas number 1, including myself. I thought Texas looked like the best team in the country on Saturday. Now, the week before, the second half against Clemson, I thought Georgia looked like the best team in the country. So this is very much a week-by-week thing. It's very fluid. And, of course, these votes and polls don't really matter. It's very much conjecture at this stage of the season. As long as Georgia keeps winning, things are going to take care of themselves. As long as Georgia keeps getting better, things will take care of themselves. But you better believe Texas is very capable to go into that Michigan Stadium where there's 107,000 people, albeit a bit of a reload. But the speed and power and passing game that Texas showed is something I think that a lot of George fans sat up and took notice of.
Yeah, you can really find out about these teams when they start playing quality opponents. So we don't know about Ohio State yet, right? But we now know about Texas. We know Georgia, who started off with a really good opponent. Now, we talk about all these teams, and they all have these ups and downs. Like a team like Auburn scores 70 one week, and then they lose at home because they throw, 4 interceptions, what is for Peyton Thorne. But all these teams have so many ups and downs, and in Athens, we just don't see that a lot from Georgia. And Kirby always says, we play to the standard. But have we become so spoiled because we just don't even worry that Georgia's going to go out and lay an egg like some of these teams have done?
No, you really don't. And that says a lot for the culture that Kirby's created and the amount of talent and the development that's gone on. But this is how a championship program is supposed to look. This is how number 1 is supposed to look. There's questions with Coach Freeze down there, obviously. A bit of an offensive guru, but that was a very disappointing home loss. They beat Cal on the road last year. As you mentioned, they had a good opening week. I've got questions about Freeze's future. You take a look around the league. Like you said, Florida bounced back, but they weren't really playing anybody. They were playing Sanford. You got a really intriguing game this week when Texas A&M goes to Gainesville to play Florida, and another really intriguing game when LSU goes to South Carolina. I was among those that was writing off Shane Beamer after that close call game against the Citadel. I said, oh my gosh, they're going to go to Kentucky and get throttled. And lo and behold, South Carolina beats the dog out of Kentucky, which has now lost 8 of their last 10 home games, if you can believe that. A&M, meanwhile, kind of gets it rolling again after that loss to Notre Dame to start the season. We wonder a little bit about Mike Elko and can they be a spoiler? I guess I would sum up the 30,000-foot view like this. It's the same 6 teams atop everyone's poll, right? Georgia, Alabama, Texas, Ole Miss, Tennessee with a very impressive win over NC State at a neutral site game, and Missouri. Those are the top 6 teams in the league, Cody. Week by week by week, I think they'll sort themselves out.
Do you worry more about Kentucky coming off a loss like that to South Carolina? You get an angry team. Does that stick out to you at all? And you worry about maybe being a trap game where they come in and do anything special?
I don't think Georgia worries about anything. I think they worry about executing and keeping their jobs, because if they don't do their job, there's someone on the bench right behind them that's going to come in and try to take it. And that's the mentality at Georgia. You don't worry about the opponent. You focus on your position and your assignment and doing what you're told. And it really is that precision oriented. I know that's hard to believe. It sounds so militaristic, but I know it when I see it, having served myself. I mean, these guys are soldiers. They're going up there with a mission, and they're going to take down Kentucky. Now, it might be a bit of a battle because of the weather, because of the physicality of Kentucky, and because of Georgia's playing style. It's kind of a strength-on-strength thing. But you better believe by midway through the third quarter, they're going to have worn down that big blue and probably pull away for about a 21 to 24-point victory.
All right, it's going to be interesting to watch on Saturday. We still have one more segment here to go on the beat. We got our Anytime Heating, Cooling, and Plumbing Hot and Cold segment. Can't wait to hear from Mike on this. We'll have that. You're watching On the Beat here on DawgNation.
Want to make sure your family stays comfortable all year long? Our family of trained comfort specialists are available anytime to service or repair your system. Or it may be time to replace your old units with a new Trane HVAC system.
We are a locally owned family business, and we carefully select the technicians who we send into your home.
At Anytime Heating, Cooling, and Plumbing, we are large enough to handle all of your HVAC and plumbing needs,
but small enough to care.
Call today to take advantage of our 3-visit annual maintenance plan.
Love having Anytime Heating, Cooling, and Plumbing helping us out with the show. We got our Who's Hot and Who's Cold segment. So, Mike, we'll start with you. Who is hot this week?
Well, I think that Georgia's going to be hot this week. I think this is an SEC game on the road under the lights. I think the players are going to be jacked up to go up there. I think Trevor Etienne, now feet wet, I think he's going to want to break a run. I expect a big day out of him. No less than 2 touchdowns and 100 yards on the ground. So I would say Trevor Etienne is hot. I think Lawson Lucky's hot. I mean, we're seeing Lawson Lucky do things at the Brock Bowers position that I think he would have been capable of doing last year had he not had that ankle injury. All I'd heard about in the previous spring was how much impact this freshman Lawson Lucky would have. Now we're starting to see it. Now, I'm not sure about the Stanford transfer and where he's at, but it certainly looks like Lawson Lucky has won those snaps and won that job, for now at least. I think Texas is hot, red hot. Quinn Ewers had a fantastic performance. Reminded me a little bit when I covered the game between Texas and Alabama and Tuscaloosa. I thought Ewers was fantastic. I thought he was fantastic once again, and they dominated Michigan. That score wasn't – the game wasn't as close as the score. And I think Texas is a team that bears watching. I wonder a little bit about their depth once they get into the SEC grind, albeit they do have a pretty easy SEC schedule relative to Georgia's, which plays, 3 of the top 6 teams on the road this year. But I'm going to keep an eye on Texas. They look really hot right now. Got to give them a lot of credit. And I think the Miami Hurricanes are a really hot team in the ACC. When I start looking at teams on the landscape that can compete with Georgia, maybe Ohio State. They don't look like they have it really going yet. Oregon's dropped off a little bit. I'm going to take Oregon out of that hunt. I'm going to take Dan Lanning and the Ducks. Maybe not all they were quacked up to be in the preseason. But I do think the Miami Hurricanes are looking very strong. And that's a program I'm going to keep my eye on as a potential championship contender.
I'm going to hop back to you talked about Lawson Lucky. Kind of on the flip side, we knew coming into this season nobody was going to be Brock Bowers, right? But Lawson Lucky, is he ahead of Oscar Delp for you right now? Because he seems like he's made more impactful plays in the first 2 weeks.
2 different positions. Okay. Oscar Delp is that combo tight end that can, knock your socks off or find a hole in the zone or beat his man-in-man coverage. Really an invaluable spot to have a guy as versatile as Oscar Delp. Takes a lot of toughness and strength to be able to take on 300-pound defensive linemen or try to beat a cornerback that's in pass coverage. And that's what we see from Delp. I mean, this is a really versatile athlete. This is a team leader. This is a team-first guy that's not going to worry about his statistics. And I'm not saying Lawson Lucky can't block, but he's more of a receiving threat than I think a lot of the other conventional tight ends. So we're really kind of seeing him do the Brock Bowers things. He is a tough kid. He's got good footwork. He obviously has good hands. He's worked very hard to get back from that injury that kind of sidetracked him last year. You kind of wish he was ready last year. You wonder what would have happened against Alabama if Lawson Lucky was ready to answer the call when Bowers was slowed down. But, that ankle injury slowed him down. But, boy, he looks awful good right now. I think he's going to be a weapon all season, Cody. Yeah, the more I see of him, the more I really like. Todd Hartley was singing his praises down at the Orange Bowl last year, and we're really seeing him start to break out. So that's been exciting. Hot for me, NFL started on Sunday. I've got to go with Ladd McConkey. He scores his first NFL touchdown, 5 catches, 39 yards for Ladd, and the way he kind of scored that touchdown for the Chargers, where he's kind of dipping and moving and making men miss, you got to love him seeing that on the next level. We all kind of wondered, how is it going to transfer? Well, 1 game, 1 touchdown so far for Ladd, so got to love to see him. Brock in that game, speaking of Brock Bowers, 6 catches for 58 yards. So Brock is now an NFL player. Always fun to see these guys take that next step, Mike. Yeah, and you're seeing more and more of these Georgia guys filling up the box score, and it's a credit to Kirby Smart and the program and the way they're developing talent. NFL teams recognize this. I had a chance to talk with the Philadelphia Eagles general manager a couple years ago, and he said, "Listen, Georgia knows what they're doing, building players, and you know what you're going to get." I think that speaks volumes about the program. I think it sells itself, as Kirby was saying. Look, would you rather come to Georgia and play against the best players every day in practice and start 1 year, or go to a lesser school where you're not going to be developed as well and start all 3 years? The NFL only needs 1 year tape. Trayvon Walker, Quay Walker, these are guys that were first round picks, and you didn't really see them on the all-American teams or all SEC teams, not the first teams at least. So it's proof positive that if you come to Georgia and do your job, you're practicing against the best, you're getting better every single day. And you saw that with Ladd McConkey and how spectacular he looked, and Brock Bowers, and let's throw Javon Bullard in there while we're at it. And the knockout shot that he put, I believe, on A.J. Brown, pretty big, strong, physical NFL receiver. So you're starting to see these different Georgia Bulldogs take control of their teams and become leaders at the next level. Nakobe Dean, another great example of that.
Yeah, the Packers and Eagles, they all took a Georgia picture after, and it almost had to be a panoramic shot. There were so many dogs in that game. Really cool. All right, so that's who's hot. Tell us who's cold this week, Mike.
Georgia interior defensive line. To me, it's embarrassment that Tennessee Tech puts up 100 yards rushing. I don't care if it's the fourth string or the fifth string or the last walk-on on the team. When you put that G on and you go out there to represent, there's going to be some expectations. And that guy was breaking too many tackles and finding too many holes. So I think this is going to be a recurring issue. I think this is, again, the Achilles heel. This is what can stop Georgia from winning a national championship, is the interior defensive line is not playing up to a championship standard yet.
So how do you fix it? I mean, are they who they are, or is it a young guy going to have to push an older guy? Is it a matter of motivation? How do you fix it?
Well, you're seeing it. Kirby gave a lot of young guys snaps and opportunities. There were, I believe, 6 players that played between 9 and 19 snaps at those interior defensive line positions, nose tackle and defensive tackle. So he's getting these other guys opportunities and chances to grow. When Brinson comes back, he's going to have to compete for snaps. He's still the starter, of course, as is Stackhouse. But they're going to get pushed for snaps. You're going to get pushed for snaps, and the NFL's watching. So I think competition, breeds a lot of success. And, I liked what I saw from Jamal Jarrett and Kristen Miller. And, you mentioned there was another youngster that had a sack. So that's how you solve it, is with competition for playing time.
Yeah, Jordan Thomas with the sack there. Cold, I'm going to go. I know you guys don't come here on Monday nights to hear me rant about the Falcons, but I will say the Falcons were ice cold yesterday. And it was a former Dawgs doing against a Broderick Jones. He got some tussles yesterday as he was back home in the state of Georgia. We also saw Darnell Washington out there, our old friend Justin Fields, but the Falcons, just atrocious. So they are ice cold to start the season, just 155 yards passing. One thing, Mike, that I'm so glad we don't have that other teams, Florida, for instance, now going to deal with this quarterback situation. Everybody's calling for the backup already for the Falcons. You got to love the backup quarterback, the most popular guy on the team, right?
Yeah, and listen, Michael Penix is a special guy, but so is Kirk Cousins. I mean, Kirk Cousins is a leader. You heard how he handled his interviews after the game. You didn't hear him point the finger at anybody. Everything was what we have to do, and us. And Kirk understands how to run a locker room. I mean, he's the consummate pro, probably not as physically gifted as a lot of other quarterbacks, but this is a guy who really understands how to run a locker room and how to help a team win games. You saw they built in Minnesota. That offense was explosive when they had weapons. I think it's just they're in a transition right now. And Michael Penix is a special guy too. Again, I got to know him quite well in recruiting and followed his career. He has the magic touch. I'm a little worried about his durability though, Cody. Michael's a guy that I think has taken some shots, and I'm just not quite sure where he's at as a rookie if you want to stick him out there to take some serious blows, because that will happen in the NFL. They will fool you. Those different pressure packages and your offense's inability to protect, I think you'd be putting a young quarterback in harm's way. I wouldn't do that to Michael Penix. I think this is Kirk Cousins' teams for now, and I think if people did their homework, they would feel comfortable that Kirk is going to get the most out of the players around him.
Really interesting. Michael Penix was on the sideline at the Georgia game. I guess he has maybe a younger brother who is a wide receiver at Tennessee Tech. So it was interesting to see him in Athens on Saturday as well. All right, we got Georgia, Kentucky this week. Mike, what's your final word as we get ready for this SEC opener?
I would say that you're just trying to win every game and get a lot of things accomplished. I mean, if Kirby wanted to put 80 points on Tennessee Tech, he could have. And, I think Kentucky is going to be a battle for survival. I don't expect there to be a lot of snaps. I haven't seen the over-under yet, but I'd probably take the under. just knowing Kirby and Mark Stoops both. I mean, neither one of them want to play 90 or 100 snaps. I think Georgia is the more efficient team and the more explosive team. I think it'll take care of itself, barring some turnovers, which I don't foresee. I think Georgia's special teams is really good this year, maybe the best in the country. Now that I'm seeing what Anthony Evans is doing on punt returns, you got to like that. And we just don't talk about Brett Thorson and Peyton Woodring enough. Both of these guys are spectacular, arguably the best at their positions in the country. So I think Georgia's special teams, Georgia power game is going to be too much for Kentucky. Again, I expect the Bulldogs to pull away in inclement weather and win this game probably 38-7, 38-10.
All right, looking forward to it. We'll see you up in Kentucky this week, and I promise I won't be doing any more Elvis impressions. The singing is done on this show.
I can't touch that, Cody. I'm just relieved. I'll say that. I'm relieved.
All right, that's going to do it for On the Beat this week. Thanks so much for joining us. Look out for Mike's articles on DawgNation.com all week long. He'll be a member on DawgNation Daily. He'll be a guest on DawgNation Daily coming up on Wednesday. Looking forward to that as well. We will see you next Monday night as we look back on Kentucky and we look ahead to the bye week in Alabama looming for the Dogs. We'll see you then.